When Vladimir Putin stepped onto Burkina Faso soil, he thought it would be another show of dominance, another young African leader to intimidate. But what happened inside the palace shocked the world. One single question, just one, left the Russian president speechless, and it changed the balance of power forever. The sun had barely risen over the golden horizon of Ouagadougou when whispers began to ripple across the city. News spread quickly. Vladimir Putin, the man often described as one of the most calculating leaders on earth, was landing in Burkina Faso. His reputation preceded him, a figure who thrived on intimidation, whose very presence was meant to unsettle even seasoned world leaders. Yet this time was different. This time his destination was not Paris or Washington, but the beating heart of West Africa, a nation under the leadership of the youngest head of state on the continent, Ibrahim Traoré. The man who had captured the imagination of millions across Africa was waiting. For Putin, this visit was an opportunity. He had watched the headlines. He had seen the growing wave of Pan-African pride, and he knew Ibrahim's popularity wasn't confined within Burkina Faso's borders. From Dakar to Nairobi, from Bamako to Johannesburg, the young captain was being hailed as a symbol of resistance against neocolonialism. That was precisely why Putin came, not just to shake hands, but to prove a point, to demonstrate that age, experience, and global clout still outweighed youthful idealism. The Russian aircraft touched down on the tarmac with a metallic roar, its presence alone designed to send a message of power. Soldiers in crisp uniform lined up. Dignitaries adjusted their ties nervously, and cameras zoomed in to capture history unfolding. The hatch opened, and down the stairs descended Putin himself. Every step measured, every gesture rehearsed. His cold gaze swept across the welcoming party, as if silently declaring, "I am the master of this stage." But at the base of the stairs stood Ibrahim Traoré. No lavish suit, no golden epaulets, no excessive show of power. Instead, his simple military fatigues carried a different weight. The weight of authenticity, of sacrifice, of a man whose authority came not from decades in office, but from the trust of his people. His posture was calm, his face relaxed, yet there was something in his eyes, an unshakable confidence, the kind that no foreign leader, no matter how powerful, could erase. The handshake was brief, almost cold. Cameras clicked furiously as two worlds collided in those 3 seconds of contact. On one side, the seasoned tactician, whose playbook had been refined through decades of geopolitical maneuvering. On the other, the young revolutionary leader, whose rise had shocked the world and rattled the foundations of foreign influence in Africa. As the motorcade wound its way through Ouagadougou's bustling streets, the contrasts became impossible to ignore. Putin, shielded behind tinted glass, observed the city like a collector examining artifacts. To him, the markets, the mosques, the traditional houses, all were background details in a grander game of influence. But to the people lining the roads, waving flags and singing songs, this was no ordinary procession. It was a silent confrontation, a contest not of weapons or wealth, but of dignity. Inside the palace, preparations were underway. Advisors shuffled papers, guards checked every corner, and courtiers adjusted the banners that adorned the walls. Yet behind the grandeur of the setting lay a deeper truth. This meeting was not just about trade or military cooperation. It was about respect, or the lack of it. For decades, African leaders had been treated as junior partners, their sovereignty overshadowed by the shadow of foreign powers. But Ibrahim Traoré had vowed to change that. And as Putin entered the ornate chamber, his eyes scanning dismissively over African artwork and traditional fabrics, he believed he knew exactly how the meeting would go. He would speak, he would dominate, he would patronize, and the young captain would nod politely, perhaps even show signs of intimidation. After all, that was how it had always been. But what Putin did not anticipate was that in the quiet strength of his host, in the ancestral wisdom that guided every gesture, in the unspoken unity of a people who refused to bow anymore, there was a power far greater than any strategy his advisors could draft. And it would all unravel with a single question. The air inside the palace was cool, almost too cool, the steady hum of the air conditioning, masking the muffled chants of the crowd outside. Putin sat at the long mahogany table, flanked by his advisors, their folders stacked like weapons of persuasion. He leaned back, removing his jacket in a carefully staged gesture of dominance. signaling that he was at ease, that this was his arena. Across from him, Ibrahim Traoré remained perfectly still. No excessive movements, no fidgeting. His military uniform was pressed to perfection, the medals discreet yet meaningful. Each one represented not personal glory, but the collective struggles of his people. He did not need to perform power. He simply embodied it. Putin began with compliments that were not really compliments at all. President Traoré, he said, deliberately mispronouncing the name despite prior corrections. You have a very authentic palace, very African. His smile carried the weight of mockery disguised as politeness. His advisors chuckled softly, reinforcing the condescension. The word authentic hung in the air like a veiled insult, as if to suggest primitive charm rather than sovereign dignity. But Ibrahim did not flinch. Instead, he responded in flawless Russian, Dobro pojalovat v Burkina Faso. Господин President, welcome to Burkina Faso, Mr. President. The room froze for a moment. The advisors exchanged glances. Putin's eyes narrowed slightly, betraying the faintest crack in his stone-cold mask. The young captain had not only corrected his mispronunciation, but had done so in Putin's own language, with the precision of a man who had prepared far beyond what anyone expected. The meeting continued, Putin shifting tactics. He unfurled charts and figures, statistics of Russian investment across Africa, stories of partnerships dressed as generosity. He spoke of security, of economic modernization, of lessons Africa could learn from Moscow. His tone was patronizing, the kind of voice a teacher might use with an inattentive pupil. You know, he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes, when I was your age, I was still learning the basics of governance. Leadership takes many years, much discipline. The implication was clear. Ibrahim was too young, too inexperienced, too naive to truly govern. His achievements were merely accidents of history, not the result of wisdom or vision. But still, Ibrahim remained silent, his eyes fixed, his posture unshaken. Silence became his weapon, and each second that passed made Putin's carefully orchestrated dominance falter. The Russian president glanced at his watch again, tapping it once against the table as if to remind everyone of his supposed importance. Yet his gestures, meant to intimidate, only underscored his growing frustration. Outside the palace walls, the people's chants grew louder. Traditional drummers pounded rhythms that echoed like thunder. Griots recited praise poems, and women sang songs of resistance. Their voices seeped through the windows, carrying the heartbeat of a nation that had gathered not by force or payment, but by genuine pride. Putin noticed. His advisors noticed. The cameras outside captured a truth that no amount of propaganda could conceal. This was not the desperate flattery of a people eager for foreign aid. This was solidarity, authenticity, and power rooted in identity. Ibrahim's mind wandered for a moment, not as a distraction, but as grounding. He remembered his grandfather's compound, where stories of colonial arrogance were told under the shade of the baobab tree. He remembered his grandmother's kola nuts, blessed with prayers older than any constitution. He remembered Thomas Sankara's portrait on his office wall, the eternal reminder that leadership was not about titles or foreign approval, but about service and sacrifice. And when he finally leaned forward, breaking his silence at last, the room held its breath. Mr. President, he said calmly, his voice steady, almost gentle, you speak of investments, of lessons, of what Africa should learn. But tell me, he paused just long enough for every ear in the room to strain, if these deals are truly for our benefit, why is it always you who is in such a hurry to sign them? The words landed like a thunderclap. Putin blinked. His advisors froze. The carefully rehearsed dominance shattered in an instant. It was not anger in Putin's face, nor open defeat. It was something far rarer, something the world had almost never seen. For the first time in years, Vladimir Putin was speechless. The silence after Ibrahim's question stretched longer than anyone expected. The translators, usually quick to echo every phrase, hesitated. Putin's advisors glanced at one another, waiting for their leader's retort. But none came. The man famed for sharp comebacks and icy put-downs had no words. The question was too simple, too sharp, too unanswerable. The weight of the moment sank into the room. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder, the shuffle of papers more distracting, the ticking of the ornate wall clock unbearable. Ibrahim sat back, his posture unchanged, as if he had simply asked about the weather, Calm, unbothered, grounded. Putin finally leaned forward, his lips parting. But the confidence was gone. We move quickly," he muttered through the translator, because opportunities should not be wasted. His voice lacked the commanding authority that had marked his earlier remarks. His advisors scribbled furiously, desperate to regain control of the narrative. But the truth was clear. The young captain had pierced the facade. With one unassuming question. Outside, the chants grew louder, as if the crowd sensed what had just happened inside. "Traore! Traore! Burkina Faso!" The voices rose in waves, accompanied by drums that beat like a second heartbeat for the nation. Women ululated, children waved flags, and griots improvised verses celebrating how their leader had silenced a giant with nothing more than words. The palace guards, usually expressionless, allowed themselves the faintest smiles. Putin shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming on the table. He was accustomed to leaders bending under pressure, to nervous laughter or eager agreement. Instead, he found himself confronted by a man half his age, who carried centuries of ancestral strength in his silence. It wasn't just Traore speaking. It was Sankara, it was the elders. It was every African voice that had ever demanded respect and dignity. Ibrahim seized the pause, not with gloating, but with purpose. His tone remained steady, his words chosen with surgical precision. Africa, he said, is not a playground for foreign powers. We do not measure our worth by how quickly we sign agreements written elsewhere. We measure it by the dignity of our people, by the land beneath our feet, by the future we build with our own hands. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. The simplicity was their strength. Putin's delegation shifted uneasily, their pens hovering uselessly over blank pages. The Russian president himself stared into the glass of hibiscus tea in front of him, its crimson surface reflecting his own frustration. For a brief moment, the roles had reversed. The man who came to dominate now sat diminished, and the leader who was expected to bow now stood taller than ever. It was more than politics. It was symbolism carved into history in real time. The cameras outside captured the sound of the people's songs, drifting through the palace corridors, and international journalists whispered to one another about the significance of what they were witnessing. They knew the headlines were already writing themselves. Traore leaves Putin speechless. But Ibrahim was not interested in humiliating Putin. His goal was never to win a contest of egos. It was to plant a seed of truth that would grow far beyond the palace walls, across Africa, across the world. He spoke again, softer this time, almost reflective. Our ancestors taught us that when a hyena comes dressed as a dog, you do not chase it with anger. You watch its eyes. And when it realizes you are not fooled, it retreats. The room remained still, the Russian translator delivering the proverb with mechanical precision, yet even stripped of its rhythm. Its meaning was undeniable. Putin's jaw tightened. He shifted in his chair once more, but there was no recovery. The moment belonged to Ibrahim, to Burkina Faso, to Africa. And outside, the songs grew louder, carrying the news before the meeting had even ended. The people already knew their leader had stood tall, and no foreign power could diminish him. Word of the exchange spread through Ouagadougou faster than the motorcade could move. Crowds that had already been swelling outside. The palace now erupted with renewed energy. Radios crackled with updates. Social media lit up with posts, and whispers became declarations. Putin tried to test our son, but he was silenced. The atmosphere was electric. Vendors abandoned their stalls to join the songs. Students raised clenched fists in rhythm with the drums. Mothers lifted their babies high into the air, declaring them children of a new Africa. Elders nodded knowingly, recognizing in Ibrahim's composure the echoes of Sankara, Lumumba, and Nkrumah, the voices of a generation that had fought for freedom but had been cut down too soon. Now, it seemed, that torch had been lifted again. Inside, the Russian delegation scrambled. Advisors attempted to redirect the discussion toward technical agreements, mineral contracts, military partnerships, promises of infrastructure. But the weight of Ibrahim's question still hung over the room like smoke after a fire. Every new proposal sounded hollow, every chart meaningless. Even the interpreter's voice carried less conviction, as though the air had been drained of authority. Ibrahim listened politely, nodding occasionally. But he knew the true negotiation was already over. The people had decided, and the world had witnessed. No signature, no memorandum, no press release could erase what had just unfolded. Finally, the meeting ended with forced smiles and formal handshakes. Cameras captured the images, but the truth could not be hidden. Putin's usual aura of dominance had dimmed, while Ibrahim's quiet confidence radiated brighter than ever. The symbolic balance of power had shifted. As Putin's convoy departed the palace, the crowds surged forward, chanting Ibrahim's name, waving flags, and singing songs of victory. The Russian leader, shielded behind tinted glass, could not avoid seeing the raw authenticity of the moment. This was not staged adoration, not purchased applause. This was the heartbeat of a people standing tall. That night, across Africa, televisions replayed the scene again and again. Analysts dissected the handshake, the silence, the question that had cut through decades of political theater. Commentators in Dakar called it a turning point. Writers in Lagos compared it to Sankara's speeches at the United Nations. Radio hosts in Bamako called Ibrahim the voice of a new Africa. But for Ibrahim himself, the night was quiet. In his private office, he sat beneath the portrait of Thomas Sankara once more. The kola nuts blessed by his grandmother rested on the desk, their symbolism unbroken. He reflected not on humiliation or victory, but on responsibility. The question he had asked was not for Putin alone. It was for every foreign power that had ever tried to exploit Africa. And it was for every African leader who had forgotten that dignity is not negotiable. He thought of his grandfather's words. Under the baobab tree, true power is not in domination, but in knowing who you are. That was the lesson he had carried into the meeting. The lesson that had left one of the world's most feared leaders speechless. And outside the palace walls, the people continued to sing long into the night. Their voices carried beyond the streets of Ouagadougou, beyond Burkina Faso's borders, across the Sahel, across the continent, until they reached every corner where Africans longed for dignity. The next morning, international newspapers bore headlines that Putin could not control, Traore turns the tables. Burkina Faso stands tall, Africa speaks with one voice in Moscow. Commentators scrambled to downplay the moment. In Paris, nervous politicians whispered about a new wave of independence sweeping the region. In Washington, analysts admitted privately that something had shifted. And in Ouagadougou, a young captain in simple fatigues carried on with his duties, not as a conqueror, not as a celebrity, but as a servant of his people. For him, the moment was not about silencing Putin. It was about reminding Africa and the world that respect is not requested. It is earned through dignity, preserved through courage, and defended through truth. That single question, spoken softly yet carrying the weight of centuries, had done what no weapon, no negotiation, no strategy could achieve. It had exposed the weakness of arrogance and revealed the strength of authenticity. In the end, Putin left Burkina Faso not with the humiliation he had planned to inflict, but with the lesson he had not expected to learn, that Africa's time was no longer coming. It had already arrived. And for Ibrahim Traoré, the journey was only beginning. The baobab tree of his ancestors still stood, its roots deep in the soil, its branches reaching toward the future. Beneath its shade, generations had told stories of resistance, dignity, and hope. Now, a new story had been added. The day a young African leader left, one of the world's most powerful men, speechless with nothing more than a simple question. If you believe Africa's voice must be heard louder than ever, then share this story. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the powerful moments that shape our continent's future.